I always think back to July of 1209, down in southern France, when the city of Béziers sat right in the middle of a storm that was about to explode into one of the worst massacres medieval Europe ever saw. It still makes me wonder how an army that claimed to fight for God could convince itself that wiping out an entire city, men, women, kids, believers, non-believers, all of them, was somehow righteous. But the real answer comes from the violent clash between the Catholic Church and the one heresy it feared more than anything else: Catharism. The Cathars, who liked to call themselves good Christians, pushed back against the authority of Catholic priests, rejected the comforts of the material world, and embraced a strict belief that good and evil were locked in a kind of cosmic tug-of-war. To the Church, these people weren't just rebellious thinkers, they were a danger to the entire system. So in 1208, Pope Innocent III did something unthinkable at the time. He launched a crusade not against Muslims in the Holy Land, but against other Christians living in southern France. His mission was simple, at least in his mind: wipe out the Cathar heresy completely. What followed, known as the Albigensian Crusade, turned into something Europe had never witnessed before. An army made up of northern French nobles, hired swords, and fiery zealots started making its way toward Béziers. Now, Béziers had a reputation for being friendly to the Cathars, but it wasn't some kind of heretic stronghold. The city was also home to thousands of Catholics. That didn't end up mattering much. Any line between the so-called faithful and the so-called heretics was about to disappear under a river of blood. And standing right at the heart of this disaster was Arnaud Amalric, the papal legate personally chosen by Innocent III to lead the charge. As Amalric's forces came closer, they demanded the people of Béziers surrender every heretic in the city. The townsfolk refused, and from that moment, the rest became legend, dark, horrible legend. Someone supposedly asked Amalric how they were supposed to tell a Catholic from a heretic once they broke into the city and the fighting turned chaotic. Amalric's answer, at least according to the story, was chilling: kill them all. God will know his own. Whether he actually said that is still argued about today, but a Cistercian writer named Caesarius of Heisterbach recorded it not long after the event, and the quote stuck. True or not, Amalric's men acted like those were the marching orders carved on stone. There were no attempts at negotiation, no hints of mercy, just the promise of fire and steel. Béziers was standing on the edge of annihilation. What still shocks me is that the Crusaders managed to break into Béziers without any real resistance. Early on the morning of July 22, 1209, they set up camp outside the city walls, expecting they were in for a long, slow siege. The city was well fortified, and its people were digging in, ready for a standoff. But what actually happened blew away every prediction and dragged the whole city into disaster. Inside Béziers, tensions were already simmering. The population, maybe 10 to 14,000 people, was a mix of Cathar supporters, plenty of regular Catholic townsfolk, merchants trying to protect their livelihoods, craftsmen, and clergy who probably thought their religious status would keep them safe. Some believed their position in the church or their good standing as Catholics would earn them mercy. Others, especially the Cathars and the folks who backed them, refused to give in to the Crusaders' demand to hand over every suspected heretic. Nobody inside those walls realized that the future of Béziers wasn't going to be shaped by military tactics or clever defenses. Instead, the entire fate of the city would turn on a single, unplanned moment of defiance. I remember how the Crusaders were settling in like they were preparing for a long stay, when everything suddenly veered off course. A handful of young men from Béziers, probably fueled by anger, pride, or just plain foolish bravery, burst out of a small side gate and jumped a few Crusader scouts. It should have been nothing more than a tiny scrap, but that little skirmish spun wildly out of control before anyone could pull it back. The Crusader army, sensing that something unexpected was happening, suddenly pushed forward like they'd been waiting for the chance. With war cries echoing across the field, they rushed toward the walls in full force. Our city guard didn't stand a chance. They weren't ready for anything even close to a real assault, and in the confusion, they couldn't close the breach fast enough. Within just a few hours, Béziers was taken. No siege engines pounding at the gates, no towers or ladders scaling the walls, just raw chaos and a city utterly unprepared to withstand it. Later on, Arnaud Amalric wrote a letter to Pope Innocent III claiming the Crusaders stormed inside without asking permission from anyone, charging as if some divine madness had taken hold of them. Once they were in the city, whatever discipline the army had fell apart instantly. This crusade that supposedly aimed to root out a heresy became nothing more than a whirlwind of killing without direction or restraint. No one tried to tell a Catholic from a Cathar, or a fighter from an innocent bystander. Anyone unlucky enough to be caught in the streets, men, was cut down. And it didn't stop there. Women, the elderly, children hiding behind their parents or trying to run, none of them were spared. Homes were ripped open and looted. Churches were violated. The narrow streets of Béziers, once full of life and color, flowed with blood. Amalric even told the Pope that nearly 20,000 people were slaughtered, no matter their age or sex. That number might be exaggerated, but even the lowest estimates say thousands died that day. For a single day of destruction in medieval Europe, nothing else compared. And then came the plundering of Béziers churches and monasteries, a part of the tragedy that still sits heavy in my chest. As the city fell apart, its sacred places, once considered protected by their very holiness, became just more ground to be looted, smashed, or soaked in blood. In one of the cruelest twists of the whole massacre, the buildings that were supposed to embody Christian mercy and sanctuary offered absolutely no refuge from a crusade supposedly carried out in Christ's name. When the Crusaders broke through the walls, hundreds of terrified townspeople rushed into the church of St. Mary Magdalene. It was an old Romanesque church that had stood for generations, and those people believed its stone arches and sacred silence would protect them. They prayed for the sanctuary of God to hold the swords at bay. But in Béziers, sanctuary meant nothing. According to several witnesses, including Caesarius of Heisterbach, the Crusaders set the entire church ablaze with everyone still inside. The fire swallowed up not only Cathars, but also Catholics who had run there hoping God's house would shield them. Mothers with babies in their arms, elderly couples who could barely walk, children pleading for mercy. Later on, bones and ashes lay in tangled piles where the altar had once stood. Other holy places across the city suffered the same fate. Monasteries and chapels were torn apart by looters. Sacred buildings were trampled and robbed. Priceless reliquaries, old manuscripts, chalices that had survived centuries. All of it was either carried off or ruined in the chaos.